A sudden confrontation between a police officer and a black woman quickly escalated, but what the officer didn't expect was that this woman was a veteran lieutenant in the field. What will happen when the truth is revealed? Let's explore this dramatic story together. But before we begin, share where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next inspiring stories. The suburban road was quiet in the morning, with trees lining the street casting gentle shadows on the asphalt. The air seemed to carry a sense of calm, but for Officer Ethan Grayson, that was just a facade. Sitting in his patrol car, he kept his sharp gaze fixed ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Though nothing seemed unusual on the street, his eyes scanned every passing vehicle, as if searching for something amiss. A sleek black sedan passed by. Ethan was immediately drawn to it. It was a luxury car, out of place in this middle-class neighborhood. Through the car window, he recognized the driver as Naomi Harper, a black woman dressed elegantly. Beside her was Daniel Harper, her husband, sitting quietly but composed. In the back, two children, Ella and Mason, curiously peered out the window. Ethan frowned. Assumptions and unfounded judgments raced through his mind. How could they afford a car like that? He muttered to himself. Beside him, his partner, Rachel Miller, glanced at Ethan, noticing the tension in his words. "What's going on?" Rachel asked, her voice calm but clear. "That car," Ethan said, his expression stern. "Doesn't make sense." Rachel furrowed her brow. What have they done wrong? Ethan ignored her, flicking on the patrol lights. Naomi rolled down the car window. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Ethan glanced briefly at the papers she handed him, his suspicion barely concealed. "What are you doing in this area?" he asked. "We're just heading to a family event," Naomi replied, her tone steady but firm. "Officer, I hope this is just about traffic safety and not for any other reason." Her words made Ethan pause for a moment, but he quickly concealed it. "Get out of the car," he said, his voice harsh, dismissing Rachel's objections, ignoring the stares from Naomi's family and even the growing crowd gathering in the distance. Naomi opened the car door, each movement slow and careful, trying not to make any gestures that could be misinterpreted. The air seemed to thicken, tension filling the space as she stepped out of the car. Ethan stood directly in front of her, his cold gaze piercing, as if examining every detail. Whispers began to rise from the crowd in the distance, some quietly pulling out their phones, though most kept their distance, unwilling to intervene. "Step back and stand next to the car," Ethan commanded, his voice low but dripping with sarcasm. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Naomi complied, her eyes quickly glancing toward Daniel and the two children. Both Daniel and the kids remained seated in the car, but she could sense her husband's worry through his gaze fixed firmly on her. Mason held Ella's hand tightly, both children looking down, almost trying to shield themselves from Ethan's stare. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes scanning the car once more as if searching for any reason, any excuse, to turn this encounter into an accusation. "Nice car," he said, his voice tinged with mockery. "Must have cost a pretty penny, huh? Or did you borrow it from someone?" Naomi kept her composure. She took a deep breath before responding, her voice soft but firm. "This car belongs to my family, officer. We haven't done anything wrong." Her clear answer made Ethan falter for a moment, but he quickly regained his tough exterior. "Do you think I'm asking for your information, Ms. Harper?" He sneered, his tone sharpening. "I'm here to maintain order, not to hear your excuses." Rachel, standing nearby, silently observed, but couldn't hide her unease. She could feel the pressure Ethan was putting on Naomi, based solely on personal bias. "Ethan," Rachel called softly, her voice trying to stay calm. "They haven't done anything. I think we should—" "What you think doesn't matter, Rachel," Ethan interrupted, his gaze shifting to her with clear displeasure. "I'm handling this." Ethan turned back to Naomi, his eyes narrowing as though he were weighing something. "There's one thing you should know, Ms. Harper," he said, stretching out each word. "If you don't cooperate, I'll find another way to make sure you explain yourself at the station." Ethan's words were a blatant threat. Naomi felt a wave of unease surge inside her, but she refused to let herself waver. "I haven't done anything wrong," she repeated, her voice still calm, but now carrying a note of resolve. Daniel, still seated in the car, was tense, unable to sit still. He subtly shifted in his seat, his hand resting on the door, ready to step out if things escalated. Ella looked at her parents with worry, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" Mason squeezed Ella's hand but said nothing. Ethan circled Naomi, his gaze sweeping over every detail: her neat attire, expensive jewelry, and the immaculate condition of the car. He was trying to find a weakness, a chink in the armor to justify his actions. When he found nothing, he stopped directly in front of Naomi, slightly leaning in to make their eyes meet. "Listen," Ethan said, lowering his voice but laced with threat. "Here, I have the authority to decide who stays and who gets taken away. And if you don't comply with me right now, I'll find a reason to take you to the station. Trust me, I can make it happen." From a distance, someone in the crowd shouted, "She hasn't done anything wrong." A few others silently raised their phones higher, trying to capture every moment. But there were still fearful glances from those around them. People unwilling to speak out even though they could see the injustice unfolding. Rachel stepped forward, her voice clearer now. "Ethan, this doesn't need to go that far. We don't have any reason to—" "Shut up," Ethan snapped, spinning toward her, his voice rising, eyes flashing with anger. "I'm in charge here, Rachel. If you don't want to be reported for insubordination, then let me do my job." Ethan's words left Rachel standing still, but her unease was growing more apparent. She looked at Naomi, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. Naomi said nothing, but her gaze was full of resolve, as if silently conveying a message. Don't give up. Rachel felt it, and she knew what she had to do. In the distance, the crowd continued to murmur. The flashes from phone cameras blinked, capturing every tense moment. An older woman in the crowd sighed, shaking her head. Not again. Once more. The air felt heavier than ever, as if everything was on the edge of exploding. Ethan, Naomi, Rachel, and the crowd all stood at the threshold of a confrontation with an uncertain outcome. Rachel Miller stood silently behind Ethan, her hands lightly gripping the strap of her radio, her eyes scanning the scene before her. Naomi Harper, a calm yet resilient woman, was facing Ethan Grayson's threatening gaze. Rachel couldn't help but notice the imbalance in the situation. On one side was a woman and her family, showing no signs of danger. On the other, Ethan, her colleague of many years, now standing in front of her in a way she hardly recognized. Ethan seemed to be wielding every ounce of power at his disposal to break Naomi's resolve. His sharp words, probing eyes, and deliberate delay tactics, none of it seemed like protect and serve anymore. It felt like covert oppression. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't dare speak out. In Rachel's mind, the reasons she had joined the police force became clearer than ever. When she was younger, full of passion, she had vowed to protect those who couldn't protect themselves and to bring justice to all. But now, standing in the middle of this clear injustice, she felt bound by the pressure of a colleague who held so much authority over her. Ethan had always been a tough officer, but recently he had changed. Rachel remembered the times Ethan had spoken about a fallen colleague, about his helplessness and anger toward a system that had abandoned them. It seemed that loss had pushed Ethan into a spiral of unchecked control, where he now judged others based on prejudice rather than facts. But that could not justify his actions today. "Ethan, we have no reason to hold them up like this," Rachel said, her voice trying to remain calm but not conceal her doubt. Ethan spun around, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Rachel, this is none of your business. Don't interfere." Rachel stared at him, a surge of dissatisfaction welling up inside her. "None of my business?" she thought. "Then what is justice if it's not everyone's business?" Ethan stepped closer to Rachel, his voice dropping but still filled with authority. "Listen, Rachel, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but the right thing here is for me to handle this situation my way." Rachel bit her lip, her eyes locking with Ethan's as she tried to find some trace of reason in them, but all she saw was a solid wall of arrogance and power. "So, this is how we work now?" Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the internal conflict that was rising within her. "We use this badge to make others feel inferior?" Ethan smirked, his expression dismissive. "You're still too young, Rachel. This is the real world. Don't let those naive ideas get you fired." His words felt like a slap to the ideals Rachel had held on to since she entered the force. She felt her throat tighten, guilt flooding her heart. If she stayed silent, she would become an accomplice. But if she spoke out, she knew Ethan had the power to end her career. Rachel lowered her gaze, her eyes briefly glancing at the badge pinned to her chest. That badge had once symbolized fairness, the responsibility to protect the vulnerable, but now it was a shackle, binding her to silence. She recalled the words of a close friend who had left the force because they couldn't bear the corruption within the system. "If you don't stand up, who will?" That phrase echoed in Rachel's mind. She took a deep breath, her eyes drifting toward Naomi, the woman standing tall, even though the situation was not in her favor. "All right," Ethan spoke, his tone deliberate, as if trying to emphasize his control. "Miss Harper, I think we need to take a closer look. So, you won't mind if I search your car, right?" Naomi took a deep breath, her voice steady. "Unless you have a warrant, officer, I don't believe you have the right to do that." Ethan smirked, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "You think so? I'm sure I can find a reason to take you in and make everything legal, but I'm giving you a chance to cooperate." Rachel couldn't stand by any longer. Her hands clenched at her sides, then released, and she stepped forward. "Ethan, this has gone too far," she said, her voice now no longer a plea but a declaration. The tension in the air was suffocating. Ethan turned back, his eyes darkening, but Rachel didn't look away. For the first time, she felt no fear of him. In Naomi's eyes, Rachel saw a flicker of hope, and that was enough to give her the courage to move forward. The tension between Rachel and Ethan seemed to freeze the air, but Ethan quickly turned back to Naomi, clearly unwilling to back down. "Cooperate, or I'll have to take further measures," he said, his voice drawn out in a threatening tone. His eyes gleamed with danger as if trying to push everything past the breaking point. Naomi, still composed, took a deep breath. "Officer, I've complied with all your requests. If there's no legal reason, I believe I have the right to return to my car with my family." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stared at Naomi, his gaze sweeping over the car once again, as if evaluating the situation. In Ethan's mind, the pressure from the crowd and Rachel's words felt like an invisible weight pressing down on him. He felt himself losing control, a sensation he could not tolerate. Silently, Ethan slid his hand into his jacket pocket where he had hidden a small bag of white powder. His movements were subtle enough that Rachel didn't notice. As he stood before Naomi, the bag slipped from his hand and fell to the ground, a few steps away from Naomi's feet. Ethan glanced down, a smug smile curling on his lips. "So, this is why you're so nervous," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. He pointed at the white powder on the ground, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You were trying to hide this, huh? Looks like I was right." Naomi looked down at the bag, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment she couldn't find the words, but then a rush of anger filled her. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice seething with fury but still trying to remain calm. "That's not mine, and you know it." Ethan shrugged, his hands clasped behind his back, feigning innocence. "I'm just doing my job. And now it seems we have a much bigger problem, don't we?" Rachel took a step back, her eyes fixed on the bag of powder. Though she hadn't seen Ethan's actions clearly, she sensed something was off. A deep unease stirred within her, but she still didn't know how to speak up. From the car, Daniel Harper had been watching the entire situation unfold. When he saw Ethan point to the bag of powder and heard the baseless accusation, he couldn't stay quiet any longer. Daniel opened the car door and stepped out, moving quickly toward Naomi with determination in his eyes. "Hold on," Ethan said, raising his hand to stop Daniel. "I suggest you get back in the car and stay where you are, unless you want me to think your entire family is involved." Daniel stopped, his gaze full of fury as he looked at Ethan. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled. "I've been sitting in the car, letting you do your job, but now you've crossed the line." Ethan sneered, lowering his voice dangerously. "Look, buddy, I'm trying to handle this professionally, but if you keep interfering, I can't guarantee this will end well for your family." Ethan's vague threats thickened the air with tension. Daniel stepped forward, standing protectively in front of Naomi, his hand gently resting on her shoulder as if to shield her from Ethan's oppression. Ella and Mason, from inside the car, looked at their parents with worried eyes. Ella squeezed Mason's hand and whispered, "What's happening?" Mason didn't answer. His gaze locked on his father, as though waiting for something to explode. Naomi took a step forward, her eyes meeting Ethan's, strong and unwavering. "Officer Grayson, I demand that you stop right now. That isn't mine, and you know it. If you continue, I won't just protect myself, I'll make sure your misconduct is exposed." Ethan smirked, but inside he could feel Naomi's defiance drawing the attention of the growing crowd. Some people started shouting, others stepped closer, holding up their phones to record everything unfolding. He could hear a voice from the crowd rise, "She's done nothing wrong. This is harassment." Rachel, standing to the side, felt that things had gone too far. The pressure from the crowd, Naomi's determination, and Ethan's increasingly blatant behavior made it impossible for her to stay silent any longer. But she still needed a moment, a valid reason to intervene. Rachel felt her chest tighten, not just from Ethan's actions but from her silence. Her eyes remained locked on the white powder on the ground, her mind swirling with memories she had tried to forget. She recalled the first time she had witnessed Ethan cross the line, a traffic stop 3 years ago. At that time, Ethan had interrogated a young black man, forcing him out of his car without a clear reason. Rachel had stood just a few steps away, seeing the injustice right before her eyes. But when she had tried to speak out, Ethan had turned, his sharp eyes warning her not to interfere. "Don't mess up our team, Rachel," he had whispered, just loud enough for her to hear but not for anyone else. "You don't understand how the world works." Ethan's words had weighed heavily on her, and she had chosen to stay silent. The man had been detained overnight, but released the next morning for lack of evidence. That incident was never mentioned again, but it lingered in Rachel's mind like an unhealed wound. Now, watching Ethan repeat the same wrongful behavior with Naomi, Rachel felt she couldn't stay an outsider any longer. The image of the young man from years ago flashed in her mind, and with it, the burden of regret. Rachel clenched her fists, asking herself, "If I don't stand up now, who will I be? Just someone who watches, or someone who dares to change?" Other memories flooded her mind. The day she swore to join the police force, her heart full of ideals and passion. She wanted to protect the vulnerable and bring justice, but time and internal pressures had made her forget her original purpose. Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Naomi's, the woman standing firm despite the oppression. Naomi's gaze seemed to send her a message. "You are not alone." Rachel's heart swelled with new resolve. This wasn't just about Naomi, it was about her too, about the ideals she once cherished. This time, she knew she wouldn't stay silent. "Ethan," Rachel spoke, her voice now clear and strong. "I think we need to stop here. They aren't a threat, and that's not enough to justify any of our actions." Ethan turned around, his eyes flashing with anger. "I told you, Rachel, if you don't want to get caught up in this, step back. Let me do my job." Rachel looked at Ethan, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of him. She felt it was time to do the right thing. But before she could say anything more, Naomi spoke, her voice carrying across the crowd. "You can threaten me, Officer Grayson," she said, each word clear, "but I will not back down. I know my rights, and I know what you're doing is wrong." Naomi's powerful words rang out like a tolling bell, shaking the already tense atmosphere which seemed ready to erupt. Ethan Grayson stood still for a moment, the usual smirk vanishing from his face. His eyes flared with a mix of frustration and surprise, but soon enough his expression hardened into cold indifference once again. Rachel Miller, standing behind Ethan, could feel that everything had crossed a line she never thought she could accept. She had stayed silent long enough. The suffocating feeling in her chest grew stronger as memories of Ethan deliberately dropping the bag of white powder flooded her mind, an act she could no longer justify. "Ethan," Rachel called, her voice firmer than before, "I think we need to stop this right now. This isn't right. You know that." Ethan turned around, his eyes burning into Rachel. "What are you talking about, Rachel?" He stepped toward her, lowering his voice but making it laced with threat. "You'd better think carefully before you speak. Do you want to go against me? I don't think you're prepared for the consequences." Rachel clenched her fists, feeling her breath become heavier. She knew Ethan's words weren't just empty threats. Over the years, she had witnessed how Ethan dealt with anyone who dared to stand up to him. The rumors about him using his high connections to protect himself weren't unfounded. But now, she was done staying silent. "Ethan, I've worked with you long enough to know this is wrong," Rachel said, her voice ringing out more forcefully. "I can't stand here and pretend I didn't see you set this up. If you continue, I will report this." Ethan raised an eyebrow as if Rachel's words barely registered with him. He turned to Naomi, flashing a faint smile. "You think my team is going to do anything? You don't understand how the world works." From the crowd, a man shouted, "This isn't the first time he's done this." An older woman added, "My son was falsely arrested like this." The noise from the crowd grew louder as Rachel stepped forward, confronting Ethan. "You've gone too far," she said, her voice firm. "I'll testify to what I've seen today." Ethan turned to look at Rachel, his eyes flashing with anger. But this time, Rachel didn't flinch. She knew she was on the right side. The crowd erupted in cheers, some of them shouting support as they saw Rachel stand up. Ethan, realizing he was being cornered, tried to cling to whatever power he had left. "You'll regret this," he whispered, but his eyes no longer held the same confidence they once did. For the first time since everything began, Naomi felt a glimmer of hope. She looked at Rachel with gratitude, but she knew the battle was far from over. Naomi held her gaze firm, locking it onto Ethan. Under the blazing sunlight, every detail of his tension was starkly visible. Furrowed brows, eyes blazing with anger, but deep within, a trace of unease he couldn't hide. The crowd grew louder, the cheers and whispers rising as they realized this was no longer just a routine traffic stop. "Enough," Naomi said, her voice ringing out powerfully, cutting through the chaos. She didn't shout, but each word was as sharp as a knife, enough to pierce the tense air. "I've had enough of this harassment." Ethan turned his head, a mocking smile spreading across his face. "Oh, you think you can stop this?" His voice dripped with arrogance. "Who do you think you are, trying to act tough with me?" Naomi took a deep breath, her hands clenched tightly to maintain her composure. She stepped forward, standing tall, her eyes burning with disdain for Ethan's arrogance. "I am Captain Naomi Harper," she said, each word crystal clear and sharp as a blade, "and I have served in the police force for over 15 years. Her words struck like a thunderclap in the crowd. A brief silence fell, as though no one could process the revelation. But soon after, murmurs began to spread and then erupted into astonished cheers and applause. "She's a captain," someone shouted from the crowd. "How dare he treat her like that?" Rachel's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't known Naomi was a captain. A wave of respect filled her heart, but she quickly regained her composure. She looked at Ethan, noticing the fleeting shock on his face. His arrogance had just been dealt a severe blow. Ethan forced a smirk, his face contorting with mockery. "Is that so?" he said, his voice low but dripping with contempt. "I've never heard of you, and no matter who you are, you're still breaking the rules." He pointed at the bag of white powder on the ground as if it was irrefutable evidence. "The evidence doesn't lie, Captain Harper." Naomi glanced at the bag of powder with disdain, then looked back up, her eyes flashing with suppressed fury. "You know that bag isn't mine," she said, her voice firm and sharp as a knife. "And if you think you can frame me in front of this entire crowd, you've made a grave mistake." A man stepped forward from the crowd. It was the lawyer Naomi had noticed earlier. He held up his phone, the screen still recording. "I've recorded everything, officer," he said loudly, his voice rising above the murmurs. "I don't see anything proving she owns that bag. On the contrary, your actions suggest abuse of power." The lawyer's words sparked a wave of reaction among the crowd. A middle-aged woman, wearing a gray coat, stepped up, her voice trembling but full of determination. "I know you," she said, pointing directly at Ethan. "Last year, you pulled my son out of his car just because he looked suspicious. He did nothing wrong, but it took me a whole week to prove that. In the end, they let him go, but his reputation was forever tainted." She turned to Naomi, her eyes welling with tears. "I stayed silent then, but I can't stay silent today. We have to stand up." Her words acted as a wake-up call, inspiring others in the crowd to speak up. A young man, holding his phone high for everyone to see, spoke out. "I work in an office," he said loudly. "I saw Grayson harass a delivery driver in this neighborhood just because he was an immigrant. But I did nothing that day. I've regretted it ever since." He turned toward the crowd, his voice stronger now. "But today, we can do something. We can say no to injustice. A group of young people who had initially stood back and watched now moved closer. One of them, a girl with fiery red hair, spoke loudly. "We're here to make sure everything is recorded. Ethan can't escape the truth this time." Applause started from a few in the crowd, quickly spreading like wildfire. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes now full of resolve. "Ethan, I've seen what you've done," she said, her voice strong. "You've set me up. This is unacceptable, and I will testify if needed." Another voice rang out from the back of the crowd, low and full of fury. It was Carl Hendricks, the middle-aged man who stepped forward, his face burning with anger. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said, his eyes locked onto Ethan, as though he wanted to burn every lie he could utter. "My son lost his future because of a fake bag of powder you planted in his car last year. My family has lived with the shame ever since. But today, I'm here to make sure justice is served." Carl's words not only further enraged the crowd, but also encouraged those who had hesitated before. A young woman, holding a camera, shouted, "Enough! It's time for us to stand up and stop this injustice." The cries of "Justice! Justice!" began to rise from the crowd, growing louder with each passing second. A few people started singing a song of unity, creating a powerful emotional wave that no one could ignore. The entire street had now become a symbol of community strength. No one was backing down, and everyone stood with Naomi and Rachel. Ethan whipped around, his eyes burning with rage. "Rachel, you don't know what you're doing," he hissed, each word grinding between his teeth. "You're ruining your career." Rachel didn't blink. "No, Ethan, you're the one ruining everything that badge represents." The crowd was not only angry, but filled with indignation. "Suspend him now," someone shouted. "She's a captain, and we've seen everything." Ethan turned back, desperately trying to salvage whatever little power he had left. "I'm just doing my job," he growled. "She's suspicious, and I have the right to investigate." "You have no right to harass," Naomi retorted, her voice ringing with strength and resolve. "And you have no right to tarnish the reputation of the police force I've spent my entire career defending." Ethan scanned the crowd, searching for an ally, but all he saw were suspicious, even contemptuous eyes from his colleagues who had just arrived. Some people in the crowd had raised their phones, recording the entire scene, and Ethan knew every move of his was being scrutinized closely. Naomi took a step closer, her gaze fixed firmly on Ethan. "You think you can escape responsibility, but today, everyone here sees the truth, and I will make sure justice is done." The chants from the crowd continued to swell, mixing with jeers directed at Ethan. For the first time in his career, Ethan felt his power slip completely away. He tried to maintain his calm facade, but his hands were clenched into fists, betraying his helplessness and failure. Rachel turned to Naomi, her eyes filled with respect and gratitude. "Thank you for not backing down," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. Naomi gave a small nod, but her eyes never left Ethan. "This fight isn't over," she whispered, but loud enough for Rachel to hear. "I won't let this happen again." Ethan stood there, powerless and surrounded by opposition. But Naomi knew that this was just the beginning. Ethan Grayson stood frozen in the center of the angry crowd, the deafening cries for justice crashing over him like a relentless wave. Each wave seemed to wash away the fragile remnants of his authority that he desperately clung to. The air was thick with heat and tension, but Ethan remained motionless, trapped like a shipwrecked vessel in the floodwaters. Rachel took a step forward, aligning herself with Naomi. Her eyes shone with resolve, no longer hinting at any uncertainty. She understood that this moment would change everything, not just for Naomi, but for herself and the people watching. "This is an abuse of power," a voice shouted from the crowd, cutting through the air like a warning bell. A young man, holding up his phone, recorded the scene. "He needs to be suspended immediately. Enough." "She's a captain," another woman in the crowd yelled, her voice full of fury. "We won't let him dishonor her like this." The shouts rose in unison, merging into a storm of outrage. The whole street seemed to tremble with the power of their collective anger. All eyes turned to Ethan, the man who had once exuded arrogance, now appearing small and isolated amid the storm. Rachel turned to Ethan, her voice sharp like a knife. "Stop it, Ethan," she said, each word a command. "You've gone too far. Everyone here sees exactly what you've done. There's no turning back now." Ethan turned to face her, his eyes blazing with fury. "You don't understand what you're saying, Rachel. This isn't your fight." "No," Rachel interjected, stepping forward again. "This is exactly my fight. We swore to uphold justice and protect the people, not humiliate them and abuse our power. You're ruining the honor of that badge." Ethan clenched his fists, trying to maintain a calm facade, but the rage in his eyes was impossible to hide. "You're destroying the team, Rachel," he growled. "You don't understand what this will do to your career." Rachel didn't flinch. "If my career is based on covering up your wrongdoings, then it's not worth having." Just as the confrontation between Rachel and Ethan reached its peak, the sound of a patrol car broke through the chaos. The vehicle stopped, and Lieutenant Mark Wesson stepped out. His movements were measured, each step exuding authority, and the crowd fell silent in response. Ethan turned to Lieutenant Wesson, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Lieutenant," he called, trying to reclaim some power. "I'm just doing my job. They don't understand what's happening." Lieutenant Wesson didn't respond immediately. He scanned the scene. Ethan, flushed with anger, Rachel standing firmly beside Naomi, and the crowd growing increasingly agitated. Then he turned his gaze to Ethan, his voice booming with no room for compromise. "Officer Grayson, I've received reports from witnesses and reviewed. Video footage from the scene. You're being suspended here and now for investigation." Ethan stood motionless, the weight of failure crushing him. Lieutenant Wesson's declaration echoed in his mind, a verdict he could not escape. For a moment his vision blurred, and the voices around him faded. Images of the past suddenly flooded his mind, like a torrent, sweeping everything away. Ethan remembered the first time he wore the badge, believing he would protect justice. But the death of a close teammate had changed everything. The helplessness he felt that day had spiraled him into a cycle of doubt and power abuse. Since then, Ethan's trust has eroded. He began viewing everything through a lens of suspicion, feeling the need to control everything to avoid that loss again. But fear had transformed into something else. It drove him to use power as a tool for oppression, as a shield to protect him from vulnerability. When Lieutenant Wesson ordered the removal of his badge and gun, Ethan clenched his fists, feeling that the only thing that had made him feel valuable was being stripped away. Inside him was a storm of anger, helplessness, and shame. He glanced at Rachel, his teammate who had once stood by his side, now standing with them. Ethan couldn't understand why things had come to this, or perhaps, deep down, he knew but didn't want to face the truth. Ethan handed over his badge and gun, his hands trembling uncontrollably. As he was escorted to the patrol car, he glanced over the crowd, those who now looked at him not just with anger, but with disdain. Ethan lowered his head, silent, but inside he exhaled, a late realization of the path that had led him here. Just as Ethan was about to step into the patrol car, a voice rang out from the crowd, filled with rage and pain. Grayson!" The voice was sharp, like a blade, freezing Ethan in his tracks, his shoulders tense. A middle-aged man stepped forward, his face twisted in bitterness. "Do you remember me?" he asked loudly, his voice trembling with fury. Ethan turned around, confusion flashing in his eyes before he tried to mask it with indifference. "I don't know who you are," he replied, but his voice betrayed him, shaking slightly. "My name is Carl Hendricks," the man said, his gaze locked onto Ethan. "My son was arrested by you with a fake bag of powder, just like the one you tried to plant on her." He pointed at Naomi. "My son lost his future because of the criminal record you fabricated. And now you stand here pretending you're innocent?" The crowd fell silent for a moment. Then the shouts of outrage erupted again, louder than ever. Rachel saw the panic in Ethan's eyes, a panic he couldn't conceal. Naomi stepped forward, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "This isn't the first time you've done this, Grayson," she said, her voice ringing out like a sentence. "But I assure you, it will be the last." Ethan lowered his head, his shoulders heavy with defeat. He had no more excuses, no more power to cling to. Lieutenant Wesson gestured, and 2 officers began escorting Ethan away. As he walked, the cries of "Justice" from the crowd followed him, each shouting a hammer strike to his pride. Rachel turned to Naomi, her eyes filled with deep respect. "Thank you for not backing down," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. Naomi nodded, her gaze still fixed on the patrol car carrying Ethan away from the scene. "We won today," she said, her voice filled with determination. "But the fight is far from over." The crowd cheered, united in their belief that they had just witnessed a turning point. But Naomi knew this was only the beginning, a beginning for justice. Ethan Grayson's silhouette gradually retreated toward the patrol car, where another officer was already waiting to escort him away. The boos and shouts from the crowd rang out like the final blows striking the last remnants of his pride. His shoulders slumped as he walked, his face pale from the humiliating defeat he had just endured. Lieutenant Wesson, standing at the center of the scene, made the official statement. "Officer Grayson, you are temporarily suspended until the investigation is complete. All of your actions today have been documented, and I assure you that justice will be served." Ethan turned, his eyes flashing with the last flicker of anger before being led away. "You'll all regret this," he growled, his voice hoarse, clinging to the last bit of power he had left. But his words were drowned out by the uproar of the crowd. "No one will regret this but you, Grayson," someone yelled from the crowd. Ethan got into the car, and the door slammed shut behind him. For a brief moment, the noise died down, and everyone watched as the patrol car slowly left the scene. Ethan's face appeared in the window, tense and filled with rage. But now there was nowhere left for him to hide. As the car disappeared from view, Naomi let out a sigh of relief, her shoulders relaxing as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Daniel walked over to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, his eyes full of love and pride. "You did great," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Ella and Mason jumped out of the car, running toward their parents. Ella hugged Naomi's legs, her eyes full of admiration. "Mom, you're my hero," the little girl said, her voice small but firm. Naomi bent down and embraced both children, feeling the warmth of her family. "I'm not the hero," she said softly. "We just did the right thing, even if it was hard." The crowd began to clap, some people stepping forward to express their support. An older woman placed her hand on Naomi's shoulder, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, but for all of us." Naomi nodded, her gaze warm and sincere. "We can't let actions like this continue," she said. "Today, we prove that justice still has power when we stand together." Rachel stood nearby, silently observing, a faint smile appearing on her lips. She stepped forward, her eyes full of respect. "Naomi, today you didn't just protect yourself. You reminded all of us why we wear this badge." Naomi met Rachel's gaze, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked in a meaningful exchange. "Thank you," Naomi said, "but I didn't do this alone. If you hadn't stood up, the truth might have been buried." Lieutenant Wesson approached, his gaze softening as he looked at Naomi and her family. "We will ensure that Ethan Grayson is investigated and held accountable. His actions do not represent this police force," he said, his voice full of commitment. Naomi nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant. My biggest hope is that this never happens to anyone else again." The crowd began to disperse, but not in silence. Conversations erupted, calls for change filled the air, and people expressed their gratitude to Naomi and Rachel. No one would forget the lesson from today's events. As Naomi and her family walked toward the car, Daniel gently took her hand. "Are you okay?" he asked. Naomi smiled, though her eyes still reflected the exhaustion she felt. "I'm okay," she replied. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much to be done." As they left, Naomi carried with her not only the relief of achieving justice, but also the determination to turn greater changes into reality. Behind her, Rachel and Lieutenant Wesson remained, their gazes fixed on Naomi's car, knowing that the battle for justice was far from over. The Harper family's car rolled towards home in an unusual silence. Gone were the usual sounds of Ella and Mason's laughter and chatter, replaced instead by thoughtful glances exchanged between Naomi and Daniel. Naomi turned her head back, meeting the eyes of the two children, both of whom seemed to still be trying to comprehend what had just happened. Daniel held Naomi's hand while driving, a quiet comfort she had always appreciated. He said nothing, but his eyes spoke a clear message. We did the right thing. Naomi gave his hand a gentle squeeze as if to respond, and we will keep going. As the family entered the house, the warm embrace of their home brought a small sense of relief. Naomi took off her jacket and sank into the couch, while Ella and Mason sat beside her, their eyes filled with questions. Daniel brought 2 cups of milk for the children and sat next to them, his gaze soft but unable to hide the worry he felt. Mason, the 6-year-old, tugged at his mother's sleeve, his voice quiet yet full of curiosity. "Mom, why was that police officer so angry with you? You didn't do anything wrong?" Naomi sighed gently, looking into her son's innocent eyes. "Sometimes people judge others just by the way they look," she explained, her voice soft yet emotional. "They think the color of someone's skin or how they dress says everything about them, but that's not true. That's why I had to stand up today, to show them that no one has the right to do that." Ella, a bit older than her brother, sat up straighter, a confused expression on her face. "But Mom, why do they think we're different? I don't understand. We're just like them." Naomi's heart tightened at her daughter's question. She glanced at Daniel, and his gaze gave her the encouragement she needed to continue. "You're right, Ella. We're just like them. But sometimes fear and ignorance make people look at us differently. You don't have to change who you are to please them. What you need to do is always stand up for the truth and justice." Daniel placed his hand on Naomi's shoulder, continuing her thoughts. "You know, kids, your mom did something very hard today. It's not easy to stand up to someone in power, but she did it because she believed it was the right thing. And I think you can learn a lot from that." Mason furrowed his brow, his eyes sparkling with childlike curiosity. But what if Mom was scared? Was she scared? Naomi bent down to look into Mason's small eyes, her heart full of love. "I was scared, Mason," she confessed, her voice gentle yet sincere. "But courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is standing up even when you're scared, because you know it's the right thing to do." Ella placed her hand on Naomi's hand, her eyes bright with an understanding Naomi hadn't expected. "Mom, you're a hero, right? Like in the stories Dad tells." Naomi smiled, warmth spreading through her heart. "No, Ella, I'm not a hero. I'm just a mother, a wife, and someone who always believes that justice must be protected. But if you think I'm a hero, I'm happy to be that for you." Daniel gently embraced Naomi and the children, feeling the unity in that moment. "The most important thing," he said, his voice full of emotion, "is that we have each other. And no matter what happens, our family will always be together." Naomi looked at the three of them, feeling a new strength rising within her. She knew the fight for justice was far from over, but as long as her family was by her side, she could face anything. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Naomi and Daniel sat together in the soft light of the living room. "I think the kids will understand in time," Daniel said, his voice low but certain. Naomi nodded, her gaze distant. "I hope that one day they'll live in a world where they don't have to witness things like today. We'll do everything we can to make that happen," Daniel replied, his eyes filled with determination. Naomi smiled, her heart filled with hope. In the quiet light of their home, their family was not only a sanctuary, but also a symbol of strength and unity, the foundation for every fight for justice. The new day had begun, and Naomi was preparing for her new role, leading the initiative to improve relations between the police and the community. As she entered the police station, the looks everyone gave her were not just of respect, but of belief in the possibility of change. "Rachel," Naomi said, her voice warm, "come on in." Rachel stepped in, her hands slightly clenched in front of her chest as though to steady herself. After Naomi invited her to sit at the table, Rachel took a deep breath before speaking. "Naomi, I just want to say thank you for everything you did yesterday." Naomi smiled gently. "Rachel, you did something that many others might not have dared. You stood up and spoke the truth. That wasn't easy." Rachel lowered her head. Her voice was soft, but each word carried deep sincerity. "I've stayed silent for too long, Naomi. I thought that silence was the best way to avoid trouble, to protect my career. But when I saw what Ethan did yesterday, I couldn't take it anymore." Naomi nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "You didn't just protect me. You protected the values our badges represent. What you did means not just to me, but to so many others." Rachel looked at Naomi, her eyes shining with a new resolve. "You reminded me why I joined the police force. It was to protect justice, not to protect those who abuse power." As the two continued their conversation, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it, and this time, a group of Naomi's colleagues from the police department entered. They greeted her with firm handshakes and heartfelt words. Lieutenant Mark Wesson stood in the middle of the group, his face serious but also filled with admiration. "Captain Harper," he began, his voice strong and full of gravitas, "we're here to show our support. Your actions yesterday weren't just about protecting yourself, but about protecting the integrity of the entire department." Naomi stood up, her eyes scanning the familiar faces, but for the first time showing deep respect. "Thank you all," she said, her voice steady. "I only did what any of us should have done." A younger officer stepped forward, his eyes sparkling with admiration. "You don't know how much this means to us, Captain. What you did has given us hope that this system can change." Naomi felt a surge of warmth in her chest. "Change always starts with small steps," she replied, her eyes reflecting a belief in that. "And the most important thing is that we can't give up. We can't stay silent." Rachel looked around the room where a growing sense of unity was becoming more apparent. Her heart felt lighter. Though many challenges still lay ahead, today she realized that positive change could start with the smallest of actions. As everyone began to leave, Naomi turned back to Rachel, smiling. "You did it," she said. "And now we're going to do even more." Rachel nodded, her eyes now gleaming with resolve. "We will do that. And we will do it together." Naomi looked over at her children, playing in the living room. Inside her, a deep hope began to grow, not just for her family, but for the community, for all those who had ever faced injustice. After the meaningful conversation with Rachel and her colleagues, Naomi felt her heart fill with hope. She knew that her actions the day before were not just a personal victory, but a small spark that could ignite larger changes. However, Naomi didn't have much time to reflect, as later that afternoon, an unexpected phone call from the police department forced her to prepare herself for a new turning point. The phone rang in the living room while Naomi was sitting next to Daniel. He answered the call and handed it to her, his expression curious. "It's Lieutenant Wesson," he said softly. Naomi took the phone, her voice steady and professional as always. "This is Harper." "Captain Harper." Lieutenant Wesson's voice came through, serious but with a touch of warmth. "We've reviewed everything that happened yesterday and wanted to tell you that you did a great job. You didn't just stand firm. You also defended the core values that we are striving to build." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Naomi replied, her tone softening slightly. "But I only did what was necessary." "You did more than that," he said, pausing for a moment as if weighing his next words. "For that reason, the department wants you to take on a new role, leading an initiative to improve police-community relations." Naomi sat up straight, surprised by the offer. "An initiative to improve relations?" she repeated, her eyes meeting Daniel's, who leaned forward with interest. "Yes," Lieutenant Wesson continued. "We need someone with leadership ability, someone who can rebuild trust between the police and the community we serve. No one is more qualified than you after what you've demonstrated." Naomi paused for a few seconds, her mind racing through a series of thoughts. This was not only an opportunity to do meaningful work, but also a huge responsibility. "I'm honored," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But this is a big role. I will need support." "You will have all the necessary resources," Lieutenant Wesson assured her. "You won't be doing this alone. We believe you can create real change." Naomi ended the call, her hand still gripping the phone, her eyes filled with determination. Daniel looked at her, a slight smile appearing on his face. "Good news, right?" he asked. Naomi nodded and turned to face him. "They want me to lead an initiative to improve police-community relations. This is an opportunity to change things from the ground up." Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder, his gaze full of pride. "I can't think of anyone more suited for this role than you." Naomi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the new responsibility, but at the same time she was filled with energy. "This is a chance to do something truly meaningful," she said. "Not just for us, but for every family, every community." That evening, when Naomi shared the news with Ella and Mason, she tried to explain her new role in a way they could understand. "Mom is going to work to make sure everyone is treated fairly," she said gently. "I want everyone to stop feeling scared or unfairly treated." Ella took her mother's hand, her eyes lighting up. "You'll do it because you're a hero." Naomi smiled and hugged her children. "I'm not a hero," she said, "but I'll try my best to do what's right." Daniel walked over and draped his arm around her shoulder. "We'll do it together," he said. "Our family will always be here to support you." Naomi looked around her home, her warm and united family. She knew things wouldn't be easy, but with her family, her colleagues like Rachel, and the support from the community, she believed she could bring about change. On the first morning of her new journey, the soft sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the room where the Harper family was preparing for an important day. Naomi stood before the mirror, adjusting her uniform with the gleaming police badge on her chest. Her gaze lingered on the badge for a moment, deeply feeling the weight of the responsibility she was about to carry. Today, she would officially begin her new role, leading the initiative to improve police-community relations. Ella and Mason stood beside their mother, their eyes shining with pride. "Are you scared, Mom?" Mason asked, his voice small but filled with childlike curiosity. Naomi knelt, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "I'm a little nervous, Mason," she said, offering a warm smile, "but I know that sometimes we have to do hard things to change the unfairness we see." Ella grabbed her mother's hand, her voice more assured than her younger brother's. "You can do it. I believe in you." Daniel entered the room carrying the children's school bags. He looked at Naomi, his eyes filled with love and pride. "We are always here for you," he said in a warm tone. "Not just today, but every day." Naomi smiled, feeling the strength of her family's unity, an energy that would help her face the challenges ahead. "Thank you," she replied, her eyes shining with faith and determination. "We'll walk this path together." That morning, the police station was no longer a place of guarded glances or silence. As Naomi walked in, she could feel the difference in the air, respect and hope. Colleagues who had once stood on the sidelines now stepped forward, offering handshakes and expressing their support. Rachel was waiting inside. As Naomi entered, Rachel approached with a bright smile. "Today marks the beginning of something big," she said, her voice filled with inspiration. Naomi nodded, her smile warm but still serious. "Not just for me, but for all of us," she responded. "This is our chance to show that we can do better, not just for the community, but for this entire department." The first meeting about the initiative to improve police-community relations took place in an atmosphere filled with hope. Naomi presented a detailed plan, creating educational programs, organizing meetings between police officers and residents, and establishing an independent oversight group to ensure transparency in law enforcement activities. Lieutenant Wesson, who was leading the meeting, spoke up. "Captain Harper has not only shown courage in confronting injustice, but has also brought us a vision of how we can do better. I believe we are here to make this change together." When Naomi left the police station in the afternoon, she saw Daniel, Ella, and Mason waiting outside. Daniel waved, while Ella and Mason ran to hug their mother. "Did you do it, Mom?" Ella asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Naomi knelt and placed her hands on her children's shoulders. "I've just started," she said, her voice full of emotion. "But I know that if we don't give up, everything will change." Naomi stood up, and together with her family they walked under the evening sky. The image of them began to fade in the distance, but the sound of their laughter and hope still echoed. In the far distance, the police station stood tall, like a symbol of the changes waiting to be made. The story closes with the image of Naomi leading the new initiative, leaving behind a powerful message that change begins with the courage of an individual, but it requires the strength of many to make it happen. Naomi is not just a symbol of justice, but a reminder that even the smallest actions can contribute to building a fairer future. Naomi Harper's story is not only a journey of fighting against injustice, but also a clear testament to the power of courage and unity. But this story doesn't end with Naomi. It raises a bigger question. If you witness such an injustice, what will you do? Will you stand up, or will you remain silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like the video, share it to spread the message, and subscribe to the channel to not miss future stories of courage, justice, and hope. Let's build a stronger community together.